No one raised a hand when the final piece of Celeste Mercer's ruined empire was rolled onto the auction floor. This beaten-down black sedan once drove her to billion-dollar deals, but now it sat dead under harsh lights. A cracked windshield and dead dashboard. The entire body coated in thick gray dust. A mocker in the back laughed, saying even her car had gone totally bankrupt. Celeste stood quietly in the corner with crossed arms and absolutely nothing left. Then a single father in a faded work jacket stepped up, touched the hood, and whispered, "I will take it." Not a single soul there understood what he saw. Stick with me to find out how this junker held the key to reclaiming an entire empire. This rundown auction house on the edge of Long Island was where massive fortunes went to die quietly. It was cavernous, smelling of cheap chemical cleaner and old, musty leather. The crowd gathered there did not care about legacy or sentiment. They were ruthless creditors trying to claw back pennies on the dollar. Cheap dealers hunting for undervalued cars. And bloggers treating the whole tragedy as a juicy, cautionary tech tale. The assets of Mercer Technologies had been sold off for 3 long weeks. Today was the absolute end, when her smallest and most personal belongings were dragged out. An old blueprint painting of her original company headquarters. Monogrammed bags, a hand-carved obsidian chess set, and finally that worthless-looking car. Everything that had once defined her entire high-tech billionaire life was sold off in just one afternoon, reduced to whatever a stranger felt like paying that day. Celeste stood silently in the far corner, holding no bidding paddle, completely alone with nothing. Only her pride kept her still, a woman who refused to let them see her flinch. She was 36, and she had once been the youngest female CEO in New York tech history. The exact same media outlets that once praised her success were now painting her downfall as an absolute train wreck. Since filing for bankruptcy, she had watched her startup vanish piece by piece. Her home was gone, and her board members issued cold corporate statements, running away from the very ideas they once called brilliant. She had not shed a single tear, and she would not start today. Finally, the board auctioneer reached the last lot, not caring how cheap it sold. He announced the vehicle, a black Austrian luxury sedan. A car her tech company had, built with a European developer to prove their custom vehicle software was the future. It had been her personal ride for 3 years, riding high with her through every massive career win. Now it sat broken in the center with a smashed mirror and dead electronics. Its beautiful paint completely ruined by months in a dusty impound lot. The bidding opened, but the room stayed dead silent. A luxury car dealer shook his head, muttering that the cost to restore. The complex wiring alone was far more than this junker was actually worth. Near the aisle, a smug creditor whispered a joke to his colleague, making her laugh behind her hand. The auctioneer slashed the reserve twice, no bidders. A voice shouted that the ride was dead, just like the CEO's career. Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd standing near the back wall. Celeste ignored them, refusing to look their way. She wasn't crying over the car's lost value, and she knew sentiment had absolutely no place in a cold bankruptcy proceeding. But there was something. A strange pain seeing that car sit unclaimed under those harsh lights. That car was in the parking deck when she signed her company's first $10 million contract. It sat idling outside the venue the night she accepted her industry leadership award. And it was her final sanctuary right before she got the call that the board had voted her out. That old vehicle had witnessed her entire rise and fall. Now it was being auctioned off to a room of strangers who only saw junk. Standing near the back, far from the wealthy creditors and slick car dealers, a man wearing a dark work jacket stood with arms crossed, staring intently at the bottom of the front bumper. He wasn't some wealthy collector. He wasn't a creditor. He had only come to the auction because he made a living buying cheap salvage lots and stripping them down for parts. But something about this luxury ride made him stop dead on his way out. He squinted at the gap between the front bumper and the frame, tracking the wiring. Let's look closer with him. He spotted a hidden clue that absolutely nobody else in the room thought to look for. The main electrical relay had been unplugged and jammed back in incorrectly. This was not how a car naturally broke down. This was how you made a healthy car look totally dead. The auctioneer was about to withdraw the lot when the mechanic raised his hand and spoke in a voice that rang out across the quiet room, "I will buy it." The auctioneer paused, blinked in surprise, and asked him to confirm the bid. The price on the screen was so cheap that a few heads turned around, not because they wanted to bid against him, but because they wondered who would waste money on a piece of junk that experts declared totally worthless. Grayson Lockach simply nodded, confirming his bid without a word. He was 39 years old. He was broad-shouldered, moving with the quiet precision of someone used to tight workspaces. He drove there in an old truck with a cracked mirror, wearing boots that had survived a decade of hard labor. He looked exactly like a working man, a blue-collar mechanic who clearly had no business being at an elite auction like this. Except he possessed a rare instinct for machines that were broken on purpose. From across the floor, Celeste watched him sign the official paperwork. The transaction was completed in under 3 minutes. The luxury vehicle that once defined her entire career changed hands for a pathetic sum that wouldn't even cover 45 minutes of the legal fees she had piled up this past year. She walked over, not because she had a plan, but because she had to understand this strange purchase. She bluntly asked him why he bought it. The question sounded harsher than she meant, but the mechanic didn't seem to mind. He told her he had not bought it. He bought it because it was cheap, not out of pity. Before she could ask another thing, he spoke with flat, calm certainty rather than any high drama. That car did not die on its own, Celeste froze. Of all the warnings she had heard lately about her liability and her negligence, or her terrible judgment, nothing had ever hit her quite like those few simple words. Garrett Holloway watched the auction unfold in person, standing there as the main voice for the creditors. At 61 with silver hair, he had spent 30 years cultivating a safe, boring reputation as a careful financial officer. He was the kind of man people trusted, mostly because he seemed to lack any real ambition. He observed the deal from the doorway, and the moment the papers were signed, he kept his face blank but quietly stepped back to pull out his phone. He approached Celeste before Grayson could drive off, offering the smooth, practiced comfort of an honest man, telling her she must let go, claiming that holding on to dead remnants of her past was only keeping her from whatever lay ahead. Celeste remained silent. He had repeated that line so often since the company collapsed that it no longer felt like friendly advice, but a direct order she had to follow. Von Mercer showed up right after Garrett walked away, parting the leaving crowd with the slow ease of a man who assumed everyone wanted to see him. He was Celeste's uncle in name only, really just a distant cousin of her late father. Over time, he had cast himself as the family's wise corporate leader. He claimed he was pulling strings on her behalf, whispering that she could keep a small apartment and a few belongings if she just signed their final settlement, giving up any last claims to her former empire. His voice carried a warmth that sounded genuine, but it was the practiced comfort of a skilled actor. Looking at him, Celeste realized with a sharp clarity she lacked 6 months ago that this so-called deal would permanently lock the only door she had left open to her. Outside, Grayson was sorting out the tow truck when Celeste caught up to him. She told him there was nothing of value left inside that vehicle. He stared at her, then murmured with flat intensity, "Maybe you didn't leave anything in there, but someone else did." The flatbed slowly hauled the ruined luxury car away just as the auction house finally went dark. Out in the shadows of the parking deck, Garrett Holloway stood with his phone held close, whispering to someone that the luxury car had not been destroyed yet, that a local mechanic bought it. His humble shop sat tucked away at the end of a quiet lane in Queens, a neighborhood of tightly packed houses where front yards were meant for work, not show. The two-bay workspace was connected to a modest white home kept in far better shape than the rest of the street or his beat-up truck let on. Inside, every single tool was meticulously arranged on neat pegboards. He swept the clean concrete floor spotlessly before locking up each night. A simple folding table sat in the far corner, serving as his daughter Piper's homework desk on days she finished school early. Today we start our story on a quiet afternoon, where a little girl sat with her notebook as a mystery arrived. She watched the tow truck steer the worthless black sedan into the second bay. Little Piper asked if her dad had bought a treasure or just a massive headache? Grayson smiled, fairly certain he had just bought a bit of both. She accepted the answer without a word and quietly went back to her homework. Pulling on his thick work gloves, Grayson started his inspection, following his usual strict routine. First came the exterior, then the doors, the hood, the undercarriage, and finally the electronics. What he found confirmed the exact suspicion he had back at the auction. The car had been cleverly rigged to look far worse than it actually was. All the body damage was just cosmetic, likely scuffed up in a cheap impound lot. The battery was not dead, but intentionally rigged with a reversed ground to look ruined. At first glance, the main control computer seemed completely fried. But the scorched relay housing did not match a natural electrical failure. The damage had been carefully staged to look fatal. Any average mechanic would have written this junker off without looking any closer. But Grayson had spent 11 years working as a highly skilled hardware security engineer. And that former life had taught him one very valuable lesson. He understood the difference you and I might overlook between a system that genuinely failed and one rigged as a decoy. From far away, they seemed identical. But up close, they were completely different. He began removing the main dashboard panel, working slowly and methodically. He bypassed 3 separate access panels, searching deep behind the final cover, tucked tightly behind a thick layer of acoustic insulation. Inside a hidden recess not found in any factory blueprint, he pulled out a tiny metal housing, barely the length of his thumb. It was held by thermal glue that had melted away, likely from the intense heat of the impound lot. 2 thin wires connected the device directly to the vehicle's secure data logger, a system meant to record highly sensitive driving data, kept entirely separate from the navigation and radio screens. Grayson called an old friend who ran a private tech security firm, describing the device without mentioning the car's owner. His friend muttered that it sounded like an illegal secondary data vault, the type reserved for high-security corporate fleets, then quickly asked who originally owned the vehicle. When Grayson finally muttered the name Mercer, the phone went dead silent before his friend flatly refused to get involved in something so dangerous. Grayson lowered his phone. He stared at the metal case for a very long time, refusing to touch it. Celeste arrived at the dark shop after Grayson offered her a chance to retrieve her personal items. She claimed there was absolutely nothing left for her inside that car. Yet she showed up anyway. He led her inside, pointed out the empty dashboard cavity, and watched her expression suddenly shift. It was the look of someone finally connecting the dots of a truth they had always suspected deep down. She revealed that on her very last night before being ousted from her own company, she had sat in the rear seat of this car for 40 minutes making frantic phone calls, including a call to Garrett right before they impounded the vehicle. The next morning, Grayson finally put down his flashlight. Whoever hid this data, he warned her, did it knowing we might be the ones to finally expose it. Grayson worked late, moving with pure precision because one mistake could ruin everything. In his line of work, mistakes are permanent. He separated the hidden device from the junk car's power system and used an external power source to wake it without setting off any alarms. This was a trick he had mastered over years to wake up locked hardware. Celeste watched in silence from the cheap folding table where his daughter did homework. He appreciated that. The hidden drive slowly flickered to life. A tiny light blinked twice before the drive finally connected to his screen after nearly 2 minutes. The files were heavily encrypted, but the key was stored right on the drive itself. This meant nobody had remotely wiped the data when the car was seized. Under a peeling strip of old tape on the outer shell of the drive lay a faded printed label. It read Project Larks, followed by a secret Mercer Technologies company code. Celeste stared blankly at the text and admitted she had never heard of Larkspur before. She had run Mercer Technologies as CEO for 4 whole years and was supposed to know about every single major project they ran. A secret code she did not recognize could only mean one of 2 things. Either it was ancient history, or someone had hidden it from her on purpose. Grayson loaded up the restricted log files and a heavy silence filled the room. The data fragments dated back to 9 months before her company went bankrupt. They saw GPS coordinates, voice recordings, and encrypted files, plus a secret trail of financial transactions. Several lines pointed to a shell company named Holloway Bridge Holdings, and the name Garrett Holloway was listed in the payment file 6 times on the very first page they saw. Celeste recognized that name instantly. That company was listed in the bankruptcy files as a minor holding company. Garrett had lied to the creditors, calling it a completely passive asset, with absolutely no connection to her company's main business. She had not questioned it back then because, by that time, she was already locked out of the finances and had to trust other people's words. She was forced to believe people she suspected were robbing her blind. Now you and I know Grayson was just a regular single dad. But he knew exactly what it meant when someone hid crucial data, especially while lying to a judge that the business was completely worthless. Celeste remembered her final night before they kicked her out. She had received 4 missed calls from a junior data engineer named Belle Dawson during that final afternoon, but she never called back because her schedule was completely jammed. The next morning, when Celeste walked into the office for her final board meeting, Belle was already gone. Her badge was blocked, her desk wiped clean. They logged it as a voluntary resignation. Celeste had assumed in the wreckage of her downfall that Belle had simply fled, made a calculated move to vanish before the actual collapse hit. Grayson asked where Belle was hiding now, but Celeste admitted she had no idea. And even if she did know, Belle probably wanted nothing to do with her. Grayson warned her, "You lost your empire because too many people stayed silent. Do not ignore the only person who actually tried to warn you." Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed at the side door of the garage. Deliberate and heavy, the kind of knock that screams authority is outside. Grayson quickly hid his prize device under the workbench behind some parts, then opened the door. A man in a dark coat presented an official legal paper, claiming it was a recovery notice for their cheap car, pointing to a fake issue with the auction. A trick demanding the Asterion car be held for a review. Grayson stared at the paper, then at the messenger, and told him to direct all of his legal threats straight to the liquidation attorney. The stranger left. Grayson locked the door and locked eyes with Celeste. Someone knew about the secret already. If you and I look closely, that recovery notice was a complete bluff, meant to scare them at 11 at night. It cited a legal loophole that had zero authority over a completed vehicle auction. It was slipped to a simple clerk instead of a judge, meaning it was completely toothless until a real judge actually signed off. What it did prove was that a powerful enemy wanted this junk car back, but feared going to court, which gave Grayson all the answers he actually needed. He called the bankruptcy lawyer at 7 the next morning. Delaney was the official attorney handling the fire sale of Celeste's assets. A sharp, methodical professional, in her early 40s, hired by the court to tear down the fallen empire, who had always treated Celeste with cold neutrality, paid only to process numbers instead of asking questions. She pulled up to the garage before 9. Checked the car's receipt, then examined the fake threat, and confirmed the auction was legal. This worthless scrap car belonged entirely to the single father now. She spoke with the careful tone of someone sensing a massive trap. The fact that someone filed a recovery claim on a worthless car so fast was highly suspicious. Grayson showed her a tiny piece of the massive secret he uncovered inside the vehicle. He watched her scan the stolen files twice, then a third time. And he watched her calm face crack, morphing into absolute chilling shock. You and I know how he found it, and he walked her through his exact steps. The weird electrical signal, the hidden panel, the secret wiring. She whispered the dark corporate names tied to the fraud. She recognized them instantly from the mountain of bankruptcy papers, hidden accounts that had popped up and vanished quickly back then, leaving her with no proof to challenge them. Celeste asked if this was enough to blow the case wide open again. Delaney shook her head, "Not yet. We have a massive clue, but we still need the final piece. To make this evidence stick in court, they needed someone who could prove the data was real, trace it directly back to Mercer's network, and guarantee nobody had tampered with it after seizing the car. They had to find someone who knew Larkspur and understood its original system layout." Celeste and Grayson locked eyes. They already had a name. Late that night, an unknown number sent a message to Grayson's phone. Just 4 words warning him to stop messing with things that did not belong to him. He stared at the screen once, then flipped the phone onto his workbench. His daughter Piper came downstairs for water, finding him in the shadows near the junk car. She softly asked if the previous owners were being mean to him. He gently told her he was handling it. Celeste, who was still helping compile the hidden files from the device, whispered that he should back out now, since the threat was aimed solely at him. He had already done far too much for a total stranger who simply bought a cheap, broken car. Grayson stood silent for a long moment before replying. I bought this car because it was left behind. But if what is inside is true, I cannot just walk away too. Meanwhile, Belle Dawson was hiding out in a tiny rental near Scranton, Pennsylvania, analyzing mundane shipping routes for a local freight company. They managed cargo routes along the northeast coast. This simple job was far beneath her actual skills. She only took it because the background check was basic enough for her staged references to pass. And those references had been carefully coached by lawyers loyal to Garrett Holloway. At 29, she had kept her mouth shut, never saying a word about Mercer Technologies since her sudden departure. A departure that was forced in every single way, despite what the official documents claimed. When Celeste knocked on her door, Belle opened it, only to slam it shut. It took 2 full minutes of pleading through a 4-inch crack before Belle finally let them in. Even then, she stood guarded. Her arms were crossed, her body angled toward the hallway as if plotting a quick escape out the back. She snapped that she had absolutely nothing to say to Celeste Mercer. She had tried blowing the whistle once before and paid a devastating price. She told them to go away so she could return to not existing in the public record. Celeste did not push back. Standing on the porch, she confessed something she had hidden from everyone for months. She had not even admitted it to her lawyers or loyal friends. She made a massive mistake. It was not the financial blunders the media blamed on her. It was how she chose to run the company back when they were thriving. She blindly trusted Garrett to handle everything happening right beneath her nose, never once bothering to verify it herself. When Belle had tried to warn her, Celeste had shut her out. Now, she was not begging for Belle's forgiveness. She was there because the fallout from her silence was still destroying lives. Without a word, Grayson placed the recovered Larkspur device onto the kitchen table. Belle stared at the glowing black box, slowly taking a step forward. She slumped into a chair, staring at the hidden device's faded label for what felt like hours. In a completely flat, hushed voice, she confessed, I hid that device in the car right before the board meeting. She revealed Project Larker was a rogue, highly secure system built by a small team to protect true data. It was built to create an offline, tamper-proof hardware record of every corporate modification. This kept vital financial models safe from deletion because the nodes were physically hidden inside company assets instead of being stored online. Think about it. The worthless car was a secure node precisely because it stayed offline, away from corporate hackers, making it impossible for anyone on the main corporate servers to delete the evidence remotely. Belle knew the truth. Her rival was secretly altering financial files to trigger the company's sudden, devastating collapse, swapping the real numbers with lies. Lies that framed the CEO while making himself look perfect. She tried to retrieve these hidden logs and give them straight to Celeste. Instead, corporate lawyers hit her with a threat within 48 hours of her first question. They seized the car before she could grab the files. The hidden drive was detailed, but half of it was locked. Unlocking the full data set required a second security key, held by a rogue auditor who had been briefly hired by the company before they buried his final report. A man named Lawson Drake, who retired to Vermont and refused to ever speak of the massive cover-up again. Celeste looked at her. Will you come with us? Belle glanced over at Grayson. He stood silently in the doorway as she turned back to Celeste and agreed, asking for a few minutes to pack. Driving north with Belle fast asleep in the back and Delaney quietly analyzing files on her screen, Celeste finally asked how a simple mechanic knew how to crack a high-security encrypted data vault without triggering a self-destruct wipe. He stared at the road before speaking. He revealed that for 11 long years before opening his garage, he had worked as a lead hardware security engineer developing advanced autonomous vehicle platforms. His entire focus had been designing offline, tamper-evident recording systems, the exact kind that survive major crashes, floods, and active corporate sabotage to protect vital data for investigators. He knew these systems because he had actually designed the very architecture their systems were built on. This was the tech Bell's team copied, but he had walked away from that world after a bitter, unspoken corporate dispute. He had flatly refused to approve a new software update that deliberately left a back door open in their secure systems. They didn't fire him, of course. That would leave a dangerous paper trail. Instead, his security clearance was quietly frozen, and they erased his name from every official patent and project credit. Every single resume he sent out to other tech firms was met with an eerie total silence. He had been blacklisted. So he slowly fell back on simple auto repair over 2 years, fixing cars on weekends to pay the bills, then full-time when he realized his tech career was dead. Celeste sat in stunned silence. She was now forced to reconsider everything we thought we knew about her sudden, devastating collapse. How many regular people existed in the hierarchy beneath that executive level, who had been crushed quietly, far away from any headlines, whose careers had been derailed by that same crushing pressure that Celeste was only now facing publicly? Grayson made it clear he wasn't helping because she used to be a CEO or because of the fame or for any big reward. He was doing this because Garrett Holloway was the exact kind of bully who, if allowed to get away with it, would simply do it again to someone else, and they might not find a hidden Larkspur device in a cheap old Asterion. There was no grand speech here. He spoke with the calm, practical tone he used when giving a car repair estimate to one of his garage customers. Later that night, back at his garage, Grayson saw his daughter Piper fast asleep on the sofa, her open sketchbook resting on her chest. He picked it up gently. The page she was sketching showed the front of that cheap Asterion. It was drawn in pencil with incredible, precise detail. Just below the sketch, she had neatly written a single sentence. "Some broken things hide treasure." He stood under the dim kitchen light for a long moment, staring at his daughter's drawing. And whatever part of him was still weighing the risks, quietly resolved to see this fight through to the end. Lawson Drake's property in northern Vermont sat far back from the road, down a gravel driveway lined with birch trees shedding their autumn leaves. The home was a beautiful converted farmhouse featuring a small workshop attached to its eastern side, where the scent of wood smoke drifted through the trees. Drake was 67 years old, having retired from his auditing practice 4 years ago at a time when the Mercer case had been his final assignment and by far his most professionally ruinous. He opened the door and ordered them to get lost before Celeste could even introduce herself. He claimed the Mercer name had cost him 2 major clients and a brutal professional review, explaining that his investigation was dismissed by the board as completely flawed, and that negative ruling was brought up by every potential client he met after. He said he was a private citizen now, with zero interest in acting as an expert witness for anyone. Celeste had brought a detailed case summary, but decided to set it aside. She told him she understood completely and wasn't asking him to testify in court for her. She only wanted him to look at the data in the hidden device and confirm if their shocking discoveries were actually real. She explained that she wasn't the only one whose life was ruined by Garrett's actions. She pointed to the 240 employees laid off during the bankruptcy, the everyday investors who bought stock based on the fake financial success Garrett had manufactured, and the engineers on Bell's team who were silenced through personal threats once the Larkspur device was found. Notably, she left herself completely off that long list of victims. Lawson paused in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, before finally inviting them inside. He explained that the crucial security key was kept on a custom device. He picked this ancient, boring computer setup for a reason. To everyone else, it was worthless junk nobody would ever steal. Once the security key went in, it paired with the Larkspur device, completing the final handshake. Suddenly, the hidden data flooded Grayson's screen in 3 massive panels. The first panel showed every single change made to Mercer, Technology's core financial records in the 9 months leading up to their bankruptcy. Every edit was time-stamped and linked directly to Garrett Holloway's account. Many even carried Celeste's digital signature. It was done through a hidden admin feature, completely buried from the board and every outside auditor. The changes followed a sinister pattern. They deliberately hid cash and faked massive company debts, all to frame Celeste as a reckless, incompetent leader. The second panel revealed private chat logs between Garrett and Von Mercer, plotting the exact timing of the financial crisis they planned to fake, alongside details of a backroom deal to steal Mercer Technologies' core software and send it to Holloway Bridge Holdings before declaring bankruptcy. Vaughn was deeply involved in the plot. He rigged the board vote to kick Celeste out, teaming up with two other corrupt board members to seal her fate. His words were highly guarded, extremely careful, except for one slipped message where he wrote that their tech had to clear the family name before Celeste realized what Garrett was building right under her nose. The final panel held an audio file, an 11-second clip recorded straight from inside the Asterion during one of Garrett's secret phone calls. His voice was crystal clear, saying they had to lock down the car before she ever discovered Larkshire. Celeste sat in absolute silence, listening to the tape 3 times. For 9 months, the entire world called her a fraud. Yet the truth was hidden right inside a worthless car nobody else wanted to buy. Just 3 days before the emergency hearing Delaney had set up, a smear piece dropped in the news, framing Celeste's discovery as a desperate attempt to save her reputation with the help of a Queen's mechanic. Fake sources claimed the secret device was nothing but a hoax. They lied, saying he built it after the auction to fabricate fake evidence. The news targeted his garage, painting Grayson as nothing more than a clueless grease monkey with 0 qualifications. Which was only true if you completely ignored the 11 years he had spent designing the exact kind of high-tech software they accused him of faking. The next morning, Grayson stepped outside to find aggressive paparazzi staking out his quiet street. He quietly retreated inside. He called his daughter's school to keep her safe inside the library, then went straight back to his workbench in silence. Later that afternoon, a courier arrived with a massive payout offer from the corporate thieves at Holloway Bridge Holdings. They wanted Grayson to hand over the secret device and the Asterion, burying it all in a private vault controlled by Garrett's own lawyers, offering him $220,000 to shut up and walk away forever. The settlement offer was written in that classic legal jargon designed to sound like a fix but act like a burial. Celeste read it in silence. Grayson scanned the pages once, then slowly set them down. He said, "If I turn this in tomorrow morning, Piper is going to ask about that junk car, and I will have to choose between telling her I fixed it or that I sold the secret inside." He did not sound angry, just practical, calculating the options the same way he would explain a transmission repair to a customer. This is the reality. These are the outcomes, and he signed absolutely nothing. Delane planned to demand an emergency bankruptcy hearing to present the critical data found in that cheap car for review by an independent court investigator rather than some biased corporate expert. The legal angle was narrow and procedural. If the massive tech deal behind the bankruptcy was built on fraud, then the entire sale was completely invalid, forcing the judge to examine this hidden evidence before the deal became permanent. The paperwork was filed, and the critical hearing was scheduled just 6 days out. That evening, another ominous text popped up on Grayson's phone from that unknown number. It warned him that his usual towing company would no longer handle his auto auction pickups. Sure enough, he woke up to find his contract had been quietly killed overnight. The shadow players had graduated from empty threats to actively sabotaging his business, which tells us they were watching closely, and they were terrified. To a guy like Grayson, that was incredibly useful intel. But losing his towing contract was only the beginning of their problems. By the next afternoon, the transport company hired to haul the scrap car to court backed out too. They blamed a vague scheduling conflict in an email sent at 10:45 p.m. The vehicle had to be there at the hearing as physical proof, locking down where that secret data actually came from. Without it, the corporate lawyers would claim the link between the device and the car was totally unverified. Celeste looked at him and asked, "Can you actually make this thing run?" Grayson shoved his hands into his pockets and stared at the battered car for a long time. The engine and battery system were still good, he realized, completely untouched by the crash. The only thing stopping the car from driving was a massive software block deep inside the vehicle's computer system. A digital lock tied directly to Mercer's corporate network. Security codes had basically turned this valuable machine into a bricked paperweight. Hacking it without triggering a self-destruct command that would wipe the drive meant they had to build an entirely new physical boot path that dodged the block while keeping the hidden files completely safe. It was an impossible job, but Grayson was already popping the hood. Inside that small garage, everyone found a way to help. Belle mapped out the vehicle's complex wiring from memory, filling in the blanks using old design files she had secretly saved on a personal drive from her Mercer days. Lawson threw on his reading glasses, cross-referencing the stolen digital logs against the timeline of events. He wanted to ensure the evidence they brought to court was absolutely airtight. Delaney drafted the papers. The crucial legal affidavit that Grayson had to sign attesting to the pristine state of the car's hidden files. Let's watch as the bankrupt CEO rolled up her sleeves to help Grayson search. Holding panels, passing tools, carefully labeling every single disconnected wire with the sticky tags he kept in a tray above the engine. Sweeping up wire scraps and debris without even being asked. She had never touched a wrench before, but she worked silently, without a single complaint. At 9 in the evening, his daughter appeared at the door to say goodnight and place a small folded note on his workbench before quietly slipping back upstairs. Grayson opened it when she was gone. "Bring the truth home, Dad." He tucked it into his pocket. By 1 in the morning, their very first attempt to start the car failed. The security system blocked the bypass, leaving the digital dashboard completely pitch black. Without showing any frustration, the father calmly restarted the diagnostic process from scratch. Pure focus, skipping nothing. Right under the base of the rear passenger seat, glued tight beneath a metal bracket with the exact same heat-resistant adhesive found on the hidden device housing. He pulled out a small handwritten laminated card. Across the garage, Belle instantly recognized her own handwriting. It was the physical blueprint of the secret installation. She had hidden it there as an emergency backup, just in case. Now we can see exactly why she needed this wire configuration to bypass the corporate alarms. Right at the very bottom, she had scribbled a backdoor code that bypassed the entire corporate security system. Grayson studied the code, matching it to the tiny pins on the main computer board. He made the connection and tried again. Suddenly, the vehicle's digital dashboard flickered to life. Engine status, maps, climate control. The pitch-black interior suddenly glowed with a soft, pulsing blue light. The engine, silent for 9 months in a dusty impound lot in this garage, roared back to life. It hummed with a quiet power that made everyone in the garage freeze in absolute disbelief. The former CEO stood up slowly, staring in shock. It was the exact same cheap car under the same dim lights. But she was looking at a miracle now, not the worthless scrap metal from the auction. Grayson slammed the hood. He calmly announced they needed to roll out by 6 to reach court by 8. His voice was as steady as if he were returning a routine oil change. At 6:15 the next morning, the resurrected vehicle backed out of the garage under its own power for the first time in 9 months. 2 waiting journalists snapped fast photos as it passed. Before anyone realized what we were witnessing, the unique car was already gone. The federal bankruptcy court sat on the 4th floor of a cold building in Lower Manhattan, a place where people were completely used to seeing lives ruined without batting an eye. The walls were a dull institutional off-white. The wooden benches were arranged in the usual, sterile setup of a courtroom, and the humming overhead lights seemed designed to expose everything. The courtroom lights felt just like that cheap auction house, where the Asterion sat abandoned just 3 weeks ago. Garrett's high-priced legal team sat smugly at their table. They had the absolute confidence of elite corporate fixer lawyers. They thought this was entirely manageable. Garrett sat there in person, silver-haired and perfectly composed. His expensive suit practically screamed authority and effortless reasonableness. Von Mercer kept his distance, hiding way back in the gallery seats. It was a safe distance he could keep, assuming things stayed purely procedural. But Delaney saw right through them. He had filed the paperwork to target both powerful men together. The first hour established the critical technical groundwork. Delaney called their expert auditor Lawson to the stand, establishing his credentials to the court without a single objection. His original report was dismissed by a corrupt corporate board, not a court. Garrett's lead attorney argued that evidence pulled from a cheap auction car had a completely untrustworthy chain of custody. Delaney was ready for that. He presented the official police impound records of the vehicle, Grayson's verified bill of sale and the garage logs, plus a digital forensic report proving the hidden device was untouched after the impound date. The paper trail was flawless. The judge overruled their desperate objection. The court-appointed tech expert spent 40 minutes analyzing the Lark's device and the car's hardware. Her report was dry, technical, and absolutely devastating for Garrett's high-paid lawyers. The data was perfectly intact. The file changes were highly authentic, and the overall security of the data showed a secure system that had not been accessed since the day the vehicle was towed. The evidence was officially admitted. What followed next was the quiet, methodical dismantling of a massive corporate lie. Not a sudden dramatic show, but a slow crush. The altered financial logs were shown first, entry by painful entry, revealing every illegal change made to Mercer's cash models. Each edit had a timestamp directly linked to Garrett's personal login. Some even bore the CEO's signature, applied through a secret override function that was hidden from the board and all outside auditors. The tech examiner confirmed it. The signatures were forged via system delegation, not signed by Celeste herself. Garrett's desperate lawyers tried arguing that this kind of delegation was normal business. Then Bell took the stand, presenting their private corporate messages, exposing how Garrett ordered staff to hide the Lark's discrepancies from the CEO. Her testimony was razor-sharp, and their cross-examination couldn't poke a single hole in it. Next came the damning secret chat logs between Garrett and Vaughn. The entire courtroom read the messages in absolute silence. The judge asked Vaughn's lawyer a very direct question, demanding to know why Vaughn wrote that this stolen tech had to be buried. They desperately tried to cover their tracks before Celeste discovered Garrett's hidden trap. The attorney argued his client's messages simply needed proper context. The judge welcomed the context, but the defense begged for more time to find it. But then, the secret audio file echoed through the courtroom. 11 seconds of road noise, then Garrett's unmistakable voice. They had to hide the car before she ever uncovered Larkspur. The moment the audio stopped, the entire courtroom went dead silent. The heavy silence that falls when a massive lie completely crumbles right before your eyes. Garrett stared at the table. Van looked straight at the floor. Celeste refused to look at either man. Staring blankly at the wall above the bench, she remembered the exact morning she drove to the office for that brutal board vote. She had sat in the back of the Asterion for 40 minutes, desperately trying to gather her thoughts, never imagining that this exact car was the only existing record of the crimes against her, and that the crucial evidence had been waiting, forgotten, inside a dusty impound lot, sold at auction, parked in his garage, waiting for him to reveal its secrets. The judge immediately issued a series of emergency rulings. The tech transfer to Holloway Bridge was frozen pending a full investigation. The closed bankruptcy case was instantly reopened for further hearings. The stolen data was sent straight to the Financial Crimes Division, sealing the fate of both. Garrett Holloway and Van Mercer were stripped of all power and suspended from the estate proceedings. The gavel slammed down hard, and Delaney placed a reassuring hand on Celeste's trembling arm. Silence filled the courtroom. There was absolutely nothing left for them to say. The truth had finally spoken, all thanks to a worthless car everyone else had ignored. The 48 hours after the hearing rushed past at the sudden, unstoppable speed of secrets that had been bottled up for years. The business media quickly scrambled to correct their stories with very little grace. The very journalists who had spent weeks eagerly painting Celeste as the cause of her own ruin now ran the judge's findings, calling the newly recovered data a massive turning point in the bankruptcy scandal. Not a single reporter offered an apology, and Celeste certainly didn't expect one. The heavy legal battles that followed were slow, grueling, and complex. The court's orders created breathing room, but not a final victory. She couldn't just walk back to her old desk, because Mercer Technologies was completely shattered and gone. But with the bankruptcy case reopened, she could finally fight to reclaim her stolen tech designs. She could legally expose the fraudulent fire sale of her company's assets and start building a brand new parent company to protect her breakthrough technology while the lawsuits raged on. Delaney drafted the legal blueprint. Celeste assembled a powerhouse team. Belle Dawson returned, but not out of charity. She signed a major contract with direct board access and ironclad whistleblower protections, plus a massive salary that finally matched her true worth after years of being underpaid by her peers. Lawson Drake signed on to be the independent lead auditor for the entire length of the corporate trial, demanding that his findings and role be made entirely public. His initial inspection report was officially entered into court records, confirming his findings were spot on. Grayson made sure that last condition was non-negotiable, and Delaney agreed instantly. Then a formal contract proposal arrived. His shop, Block Forensic Auto, was named the official custodian of the hardware evidence throughout the trial, charged with protecting and logging every physical piece of evidence tied to the case. The contract was simple and the pay was fair. But it came with a personal letter from Celeste, sharing something unexpected. She wrote that she had spent a year feeling like the world ignored the truth. Yet it turned out there was still at least one person who looked closely at broken junk to see what was truly wrong. He read those words at his workbench early that morning. Then he tucked it away safely inside his tax document drawer, before calling the lawyer to finalize the agreement. When Celeste arrived to move the car into a secure vault, she asked if he wanted to keep anything from it before it went. He paused for a second, then shook his head. He said the car was perfect as it stood. His only request was that once this legal battle ended and the truth was made public, it would be told honestly, without cutting corners. The real story was about a powerful woman who was set up, a brave young engineer who risked her career to save the evidence, an old auditor who hid the key, and a mechanic who looked where everyone else ignored. The junk car was simply the quiet place where that truth waited. Celeste stood in the quiet garage for a moment, processing his words. She said, "I thought I lost everything the day they took my company. It turns out the last thing they missed was the only thing that held the truth." Grayson looked at her and said, "No, you held the truth. The car was just waiting for the right person to open it." Months later, Celeste stood at a modest podium in a cramped room, not some grand press hall. No glass and steel corporate atrium here, just a rented midtown space with metal chairs and a borrowed projector. She announced that the court had fully validated the evidence found inside that junk car. A federal review had officially confirmed the massive fraud behind her company's collapse, and the core technology she had spent her life building was finally being returned to her control through a brand new company backed by independent oversight. She laid out the facts in the exact order they happened, without any exaggeration, and then she spent 20 minutes answering questions, refusing to say anything she could not completely prove. Meanwhile, the man who ruined her faced 3 massive lawsuits and a federal investigation. Her treacherous relative, Von Mercer, stepped down from all family business roles, while the corrupt board members exposed by the hidden data logs quietly resigned within 10 days of the court order. Grayson, however, did not attend the press conference. He had another cheap car in his shop needing a total rewiring job, and his daughter needed their kitchen table from 4 to 6 p.m. for her Friday school project. He was working in the garage when Celeste called to say the official statement went well. He told her he was glad. She teased him that his response was typical, especially for a victory she had spent nearly a year working toward. He let out a short, genuine laugh and she joined in. The workshop now had a brand new sign hanging above the door. Lock Forensic Auto and Electrical, specializing in complex electrical diagnostics and hardware evidence preservation. His phone rang much more often now, and the calls were not just about fixing cars. 6 months after the legal battle finally ended, the Asterion was placed right at the center of a small exhibition organized by a nonprofit focused on corporate governance and transparency. The vehicle was cleaned but never restored. The cracked side mirror remained broken, Scratches earned from the impound lot were still clearly visible, and the metal brace, where the second instrument panel had been, taken out and put back, remaining slightly uneven under close inspection. A simple placard beside the car read, "No one wanted it, so it kept the truth." Piper stood looking at the car and told her dad it looked like it had been through a lot. He told her she was exactly right. She asked if that was good, and he replied that it depended on how you view scars. Are they just reminders of what happened or proof that you survived? Piper thought for a moment and said both, and he agreed she was right again. Celeste stood a few steps away, watching the two of them in front of the car that started everything. The car that had once carried her to the very peak of her success. The vehicle left behind when her empire finally collapsed. Yet it held on to the truth because nobody had looked close enough to see what was actually hidden inside. Not just a cracked windshield or a dead dashboard, it was never a failure. Just sitting under cold garage lights, waiting for someone to slash the price. The truth patient and untouched. Waiting for the one man who would look at a broken machine and understand it had not broken on its own.